Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining our webinar today on how shoppers want to pay in Europe in 2020. I'm just going to wait a few seconds just so everybody has the time to join us, but we're also grateful that you've taken the time to join us today. As for introductions, I'm Kati Chitrakorn. I'm the retail and marketing editor at Vogue Business. For some of you who have maybe come in through Worldpay who aren't so familiar with what we do, we are an online fashion industry publication launched by Condé Nast, and we aim to empower business professionals to make better business decisions. I'm joined today by Maria Prados, who is the President of Global Retail and VP at Worldpay from FIS. Maria, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Katie. I'm really excited to be here today. And yeah, I can't wait to tell you a little bit more about payments and then, of course, the Q&A after.
Fantastic. Well, this is the first of a trilogy of webinars that we're hosting, which has come out of a branded content series between Vogue Business and Worldpay by FIS. And at the end of the session, there'll be a link on the screen that you can click on to download the report that we've worked on together. But today in this webinar, we'll be discussing three key things. The first is how consumer behavior is changing in Europe. Second, the effects of COVID-19, cybersecurity, and generational shifts from consumers like millennials and Gen Z. And then also looking ahead, the biggest payment opportunities and challenges that Maria sees in payments. Maria, so I thought it would be nice to start by just talking about the state of the European payments industry, just to set things up for our audience. Like, what have been your observation of the payment solution market and how is it changing?
Yes, for sure. So yeah, let me start just by saying that Europe is actually not a country, right? It's a group of very different countries that have very different people with shopping behaviors, and yeah, kind of from a payments perspective, that also kind of has an impact. So we have to be very careful when we talk about Europe. But what I really like to do, if we're oversimplifying, is kind of cutting Europe in the middle and saying that potentially if you look more at the south of Europe, those countries are mainly more card heavy. So still payment with cards is it's kind of like the preferred payment method now. But right now we're seeing that those countries especially are migrating massively into mobile and digital wallets, right? As everything goes more digital, these wallets are just consolidating all of the different cards that you already had in use. They're also keeping all of your data inside, so it's much more convenient for you to pay. Then if we think more at the Northern Europe, in there, more what we call alternative payment methods that are actually not alternative anymore. I mean, they're actually a very established payment methods, but you can find, for example, Sweden, which is the home of Klarna, which is the largest buy now, pay later payment method, right? So paying, and in there, around 30% of the shoppers are already using this payment method to pay. So we're seeing that in there, digital has been established for longer, but still those payment methods are starting to grow and expand into the rest of Europe as well.
Mm-hmm. No, I think you're absolutely right to say that Europe is an incredibly diverse payment market. I mean, I'm wondering, are you seeing changes in in consumer behavior, or are there certain qualities or attributes that are unique to this consumer segment in this market, which I suppose plays a turn in driving growth in certain areas of the payment industry?
Yes, for sure. So actually, Europe is quite advanced in terms of payments, right? Even financially, and the financial system is quite advanced. So anything digital has kind of been established in there for a while, but also it is usually the first region that starts progressing even through regulation. So one thing that is very important to note around Europe is that we have what we call the PSD2 regulation, which is now going to go live. And one of the biggest implications in here is that it's going to kind of push all of the retailers to have this strong customer authentication, which basically wants to control fraud, which I know we're going to touch on fraud a little bit later, but also in a way that a shopper is going to have to authenticate themselves in an extra different way. So right now you have things like 3DS, which I don't know, probably, I mean, living in the UK, everyone has gone through kind of that process. From a shopper perspective, it's actually quite painful, and especially if you're doing like mobile payments, right? So, but because we're so used to it and it's kind of the norm, probably is not going to impact countries like this. But as rules like this start to expand to other countries, like in the US, for example, when you have no friction whatsoever, then we have to be like very careful into what is going to be the new innovation that is going to come up. I definitely see that biometrics, for example, is going to play a massive role to help the user experience be much smoother rather than clunky when you need to enter a different either password or something that you own.
No, completely. And you're right. I'd love to come back to fraud and definitely understand the in and outs of biometric payments. And it's also interesting as well that you say, the adoption rate of advanced payments in Europe has been fast. Like, what for those who aren't so familiar, like what untapped potential revenue is there, and how can retailers better prepare? How do you put this into practice?
Yeah, definitely. So for example, you're showing right now a graph, right, from our Regional Global Payments Report. So you can see in there, for example, how digital wallets are actually pretty much across all of the key countries having a really kind of high market share in terms of like payments. But if you see China, that's even like way higher. And this is because this country and many other developing countries have kind of like skipped a technology generation. So they've moved online mobile first. And every new person that is coming online, it's doing it through a mobile phone, right? So on a mobile phone, the user experience and the payment checkout has to be much slicker than when we had the big PCs before, right? Which the screen was much bigger and you could actually enter your card details and it wasn't the end of the world. But right now you just need, the screens are much smaller. You definitely need like a one click through. And I think we're seeing this in Europe with the newest generations that are coming in. So the Generation C, which is now, again, very similar to what the Chinese population, so they're all coming mobile first, and that's the first interaction that they have with the internet, and that's the first purchases that they start making. So digital wallets are definitely playing a really big part. It's a really big part of the payment method right now, and every retailer should be offering the right ones for the right countries for sure.
No, absolutely. And also just for everybody else listening in who's interested to learn more about China, in the coming week, we'll also be hosting another dedicated specifically towards the APAC region. So do tune in for that. But also, Maria, like before this call or earlier on in the week when we were preparing, we were also discussing how, global e-commerce, it has huge potential and opportunities for retailers, but too often the focus on the digital consumer is lost in the end payments value chain. And like payment solutions should be created factoring the specific needs of consumers. Like they should be the first touch point in the value chain and not the last. But what do you think have been the biggest challenges in this industry?
Yeah, so probably the biggest challenge, and especially in retail, it's most of the times legacy systems, right? So it is, and when we see that a lot of like digital first retailers are going to market and being extremely successful, that is also kind of leading the way on a lot of the innovation and the push for these new payment methods. Because back, let's say like 5-10 years ago, with actually payments in store, they were so fixed to whatever was the legacy system that you had in the store, that making any change was a nightmare operationally, but also on the investment of the technology piece, right? So you had what you had. It's actually the point where you have most of the friction for the shopper in a store. It's when you go and pay, and you have to make a queue, and you have to wait, and you have to like go into there and then go and pay. But then as e-commerce and the more digital ways of payments have like started to grow, we're actually seeing that this is paving a lot of the way, even in the point of sale. So digital wallets are no longer an e-commerce only payment method. So, and to be fair, same applies for buy now, pay later, or even installments, right? So now what we're definitely saying is that the shopper doesn't really care which is the channel they're interacting with the retailer anymore. So, and they want to pay the way they want to pay. So if they have their digital wallet that they like to use, they would like to use this one as well in the store. And I guess now, and we'll touch on COVID-19 after, this has been like the ultimate like extreme situation to push this even further, as in you just have no other option rather than interact digitally first. And even when you're in store, make that store way more kind of self-serve, and even without touching anything or anybody.
Mm-hmm. No, definitely what you just said, like in recent months, we've seen cautious consumers just around the world nervously navigating, COVID-19, and some observers have said that this has expedited, a trend towards a cashless economy. And what are you seeing? Like, what will be the lasting impacts of COVID-19 on this industry? And are cash and ATMs a thing of the past now going forward?
Yes, so we just saw the last one of the latest reports, so that cash withdrawals in the UK only had dropped by 60%. Which is massive, right? So so we're definitely seeing that this has been more rather than a choice. It has been kind of something that just people had to do, because in many stores you can see that they don't allow and they don't accept cash anymore. So and they just want you to pay contactless, however that's going to be, with your card or with your digital wallet. So in some cases it's not a choice thing. It's actually more that you just don't have any other option. But I guess the biggest question now is, would these new shopping and payment behaviors, are they going to stick forever? Or once things go back to normal, or the new normal that we like to call it, are people just going to revert back to withdrawing cash and making more cash payments, or are they just going to stick and make everything digital? And like that's probably then the death of cash.
Right, and I think that's what everybody in the industry is waiting to see as well, whether kind of like everyone will stick to what's happening now, or whether they'll just revert back to the way things were before. And I think along with COVID-19, there's also been rising concern around the increasing levels of e-commerce and online fraud in Europe. And therefore protection against cybercrime has become a bit of a concern. Like, are these problems that you've seen? And do you think there are certain countries in Europe that are at higher or lower risk?
Yes, so definitely, and especially in Europe, when point of sale, you have the chip and pin technology, right? So fraud is almost zero, right? So what's happened is, like it always happens, whenever the fraud is kind of limited to nothing, then the fraud moves to a different channel, right? So that's what happened. So everything started moving online. Now, fraud is it's a tricky one, right? Because you need to find the right balance as a retailer. You cannot reduce fraud to zero, because you might be turning away good transactions, because either you're putting a lot of different steps in the middle to just make 100% sure that it's a good transaction that people are dropping out, or you just might be putting too many controls that some valid and good transactions are just not making it through, right? So it is very important. And when I talk to retailers about this a lot, it's always like, you just need to know what makes you feel comfortable and what can you manage, and then define how fraud should look. Now, I think in e-commerce now, and fraud tools, fraud prevention tools are quite advanced, because it's been now, it's been going on kind of like for a while. So I certainly 100%, every time a retailer is starting to gain enough volume online, they do need a fraud prevention online tool. That is for sure. But many, and the ones we use have to be like based on artificial intelligence, based on data that they can learn, and they can teach themselves to know exactly what a good transaction looks like, especially for your company. Because again, depending on what type of product or which country, you would have higher or lower fraud. So that is definitely something they should be looking at. Now, I think as new technologies, as new channels come in, that's probably where the fraud's going to move. Mm-hmm. So when we're talking, and again, COVID-19 has also pushed very high on social commerce. And like the social media platforms are having more interaction than ever. So, and shoppers are clicking through on the ads and like getting redirected. Now, if you get redirected to the retailer's website, it's fine, because then you would have it under control. But if not, and as payments start to get smoother within the social platforms, that probably could be like a point that we would need to control fraud around, because it's a new channel, it's new technology. So that's probably where the fraud would move. But yeah, as we said before, Europe is big on regulation. So PSD2, it's happening just because of one of the objectives. So they do want to add that extra layer of authentication from the shopper. But of course, depending on how you implement it, it can be smooth or it could be painful. If you're doing kind of biometrics and you have like facial recognition or your fingerprint, something like that, it could be very straightforward, but it would also have implications in fraud. So some technology around that is still not 100% developed, and fraud is not 100% controlled. Mm-hmm. So that's where I think more of the fraud is going to start coming from, new channels and new technologies as they go into the market.
I know that's so interesting, and also what you were saying about social commerce, like the growth of that, I would also imagine are being driven by younger and digitally savvy consumers like millennials and Gen Z, who we're asked for all the time at Vogue Business. And I think one of the defining features of this demographic is that they're really comfortable with all things digital. They're happy to adopt new technologies. Like, for you, how are they shaping tomorrow's payment landscape? And what desire, I mean, if you could elaborate, you mentioned a bit about biometric payments, but what desire have you seen for that, or other features like buy now, pay later?
Yes, so buy now, pay later, definitely. And they are actually the ones that are pushing it. I think you can see it in the graph that you're showing now, but so just kind of like to make sure that everyone's on the same page, from like buy now, pay later payment methods, you usually have two different versions or two varieties that most of the providers offer, but some only offer one of them. So if we talk about Klarna, which is the one that is the largest in Europe, that especially in Sweden, then Klarna started as what we call like electronic invoicing. So actually, what it means is you buy something right now, but you only pay for it once you've received it, you like it, and then you make the payment, right? So that worked extremely well in fashion, obviously, because returns are quite high. You want to see that it fits, that is exactly the right color, and that it is what you wanted. So they started and they did extremely well with especially online fashion retailers. Now, now most of these payment providers have a second option as well, which is paying in installments, but with no interest, right? So you can pay in 3 or 4 different payments. So that has also opened the market, because a lot of people that would have not bought something because maybe it was too expensive or they couldn't afford it all right away, they now have the option of paying for anything. So it could be just a t-shirt, and you can pay for it in like 4 different installments without incurring into any kind of credit or having to pay any kind of interest. So that's the piece that now, especially also with COVID-19, which, as we know, unfortunately is also bringing a really, really big crisis to the economy, then that's probably what is making a lot of these buy now, pay later payment methods kind of grow and start gaining in market share, because they're also allowing for people to be able to afford and to buy what they need and pay then in different installments.
No, that's very interesting. I think what I'm curious to know is that like here in like the UK where we are based, you know, companies like Topshop and ASOS, River Island, H&M, like these just a few of the brands that offer services like Klarna, but they're mostly fast fashion or mass companies. Do you think this kind of payment solution, like buy now, pay later, better suits certain type of brands? Is it something that luxury brands also offer or should be offering?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And what I think is quite interesting about someone like Klarna or Afterpay as well, which is Australian, but it's also very, very large and gaining market share in Europe. It's that they do a lot of direct to consumer positioning and marketing. So they have, and you probably have seen it, like in the UK, we have ads around like the tube when we could take the tube, like all of advertising about them, and a lot on TV as well, and then on Instagram they're all over, right? So what they are doing is they're going direct to the consumer, direct to the shopper, to create that loyalty base, and they have a very specific segment in there, which I think fits extremely well with fast fashion, like because it's the same segment as ASOS would have, like H&M, right? So things that are not extremely expensive, but that you can wear and you can keep updating your wardrobe constantly for like new occasions. And they've done an amazing job at positioning themselves into that customer segment. Now, when we talk about luxury, I am not sure because we're talking about a completely different segment, right? And probably like different needs as well. So then it would be interesting to see if when you're a shopper from luxury brands, is more around exclusivity maybe, or like VIP, which is not a lot of what these payment methods have been pushing for. But it's definitely, I mean, I know because we work with them, and they are definitely expanding into different verticals and different customer segments. So I guess we'll have to see.
No, really interesting. And beyond kind of buy now, pay later, are you seeing any other interesting options, like payment options that are becoming more prominent in Europe?
Yes. So, for example, we haven't talked about bank transfers, and which is basically when you want to buy a product and you just want to make a bank transfer directly from your bank account to the retailer's bank account. Now, this is, for example, in the Netherlands, this already represents like around 40% of their of the payments are made this way. And then there's positives and negatives in here. The positive is that the money moves really fast. So it's an instant payment, which is great. And especially when you are asking when you want to return something and you want your refund, to just get the money right away. Right now you have to wait, depending, right? Like 3-5 days, whatever it is, to get the money back. So that's kind of like one of the positives. The negatives or the challenging had been that for a retailer is that you have to, you would have to connect to all of the different banks from like all of the different shops that the shoppers would be using. But now this regulation we were talking about, which is only European, the PSD2, they are forcing banks to use one standard API. So that way, for us, like the payment providers can just connect through the same API to every single bank. So definitely, we do think that this is, and we're seeing in the on the report as well, that this is going to start growing more and more and more, because it's just going to be way easier for the retailers to implement. Also, a very good benefit is you don't have almost any chargebacks, which is fantastic for a retailer. And then, but I guess the next question would be like, how much is the shopper going to adopt, and how are they going to feel comfortable? Because it's different. Also, if you make the transfer, and then right now, if you pay something with your card, and you say, no, it wasn't me, or it wasn't you, or you had fraud, you can definitely call and ask for chargeback, right? You go to your bank and you say, hey, I did not make this payment, this was not, and then you get the money back.
Right.
With the bank transfer, once you pay, the money's gone.
I see.
Right. So it is more difficult actually to for anyone to kind of forge it, because it's not a card that someone can see or copy. It's just your banking details. But still, if it happens, or then you have no one to like call and claim your money back. So I get that that's probably one of the biggest things in terms of consumer adoption. But as I said, in the Northern Europe, it's actually quite standard, and a lot of people are already using the bank transfer to pay. So that and with this new regulation, is probably going to spread faster.
Sure. I think, like, from what we've been discussing, what's clear is that the payments industry has changed so much since 5 years ago, and it's likely to undergo even more changes, in the next 5 years. So I guess, what is your key advice for, international e-commerce businesses looking to grow, or how can companies thrive in the industry with all these new payment innovations happening?
Yeah, so I think it's very, very important to adapt to your shopper, right? And to really understand what your shopper is. And the same way that a retailer would do it for like marketing tools, and to market to your shopper, and to even manufacture or buy the goods that they're going to sell, they have to do exactly the same thing with payments. Right? So it is very, very important that the shopper is kind of like at the center of the payments decisions. Now, as we've talked about, it just changes so much by country, by generation. So it's quite hard to make sure that you're doing everything, and it's almost impossible to localize 100% on every single country, right? So what I think every retailer should be doing is gathering all of the information, getting all of the data that they can, and discuss with the experts on the field. So with whatever it is, their payment provider, they are the ones that, and in our case, we are the ones that are constantly on top of every single trend, on doing a lot of the research, like the one that we've been doing together, and making sure that we have all that data. So then the retailer can prioritize and then say, okay, this is what makes sense for my business right now. I'm going to localize 100% in these 3 countries because I have most of my transactions coming from this type of shopper. But then I'm going to leave it more generic in these other ones as they grow, or however it ends up looking. And then not to be scared to try and innovate and try new things, because like Worldpay, I only work with the retail vertical, but you can see that other verticals like digital content, for example, sometimes are are more willing to say, oh, this is something new in the market, let me test it out. And in retail, it's a lot about, oh, who have you done it with before? Or like, I don't want to be the guinea pig. So it's a bit more into, oh, are we sure that this is going to be incremental? This is going to be cannibalizing? But sometimes you just have to give it a go and start exploring what else is there, and how can you help your shopper discover also what are the newest technologies that are out there, and making the payments much sleeker while you still control your fraud, of course.
Now, this is such an exciting topic. I feel like we can just, go on for start wrapping things up now, though. So I thought it would be nice, just like for you personally, what excites you the most about the future of the payments industry in Europe, or are there any technological advancements that you're really excited to see develop?
Yeah, so I would love to see more, and it's kind of payments linked to user experience, right? So I would like to see more, now that we're pushing and that everyone's definitely going through this digital transformation. How can we embed payments in every new technology that we deploy in retail? So payments need to be thought of at a more strategic level. Like, for example, when we're talking about with some brands, I was talking about these like virtual reality kind of journeys that they want to take their shopper on. Then you ask them like, yeah, but what's going to be the payment journey like? They're going to have to take the headset off. They're going to have to log into another place and then make the payment. But that's not going to happen, right? Like, you're going to lose your shopper. So I think payments is, to me, we oversimplify retail. You just need to be able to deliver a product and to take the money. If one of those things don't work, then forget about everything else. So I'm really excited now that most of our retailers and all of the brands that we work with want to take those discussions about payments right at that moment where they are defining the new technologies and the new innovation that is coming in, to make sure that they can actually take the money while they give that amazing experience to the shopper. So I'm really excited to keep exploring that part.
Oh, no, thank you so much, Maria. That was really valuable and really challenging as well for how we think about the payments industry. So, like, what we've learned so far in this conversation is that during COVID-19, the use of cash, as we discussed, has really raised concerns around cleanliness and possibility of viral transmissions during this time. And even before COVID-19, we're seeing new technologies pop up kind of left, right, and center, to make paying for goods and services easier and more frictionless. And that really should be a priority, as you mentioned, for most companies and retailers, because the rules of retail are changing. Websites used to be secondary to physical stores, but we're really seeing that dynamic shift, and physical stores are now increasingly supporting the online ones, and which in turn we're seeing drive the growth in the payments market. For everyone who's tuned in, for further reading or data, you can visit the branded content research that was conducted by Vogue Business with Worldpay from FIS, and the link to this will be provided on the last slide. But now I think it would be a really great time to move on to questions from the audience. Again, for everyone who's tuned in, you can submit questions via the Q&A function on Zoom, or you can email Vogue Business directly. But the first one I had that came in was that someone was just saying that we've talked a bit about biometric payments, but not so much about voice payments. Do you think we'll see more of that payment method in Europe in a short or long term? And what if consumers are unfamiliar with technology, or what if they try it and they're turned off because they're not familiar with the way of working?
Yeah, that's a very good point. We didn't touch on voice commerce, and we're definitely seeing it coming more and more into the market. So voice commerce works extremely well now for a lot of kind of this retailing subscription models, right? So for example, what we call like replenishment. So you run out of something that you use all of the time. It's a lot of these retailers are enabling some kind of like voice commerce to say just like, hey, I need more detergent, or hey, I need more coffee. And that we see that is actually working well. From a payment perspective, it still has to develop quite a bit. And as I said, in subscription, it works because you've already done the check of the payment. You already have the token of who your shopper is. So you just have to take like another payment, which is whatever it is next. I actually think that for the next phase, and as the technology develops, fashion should be amazing, because not only at the payment point, but also because of all of the data points that you can get. Like, imagine if you could actually record things like, oh, this color is not as good as what I thought, or it feels like it's a bit too long or too loose in here, and you start like keeping all of that data about the shopper. Then you can 100% target the next product to them, but also you can target even like your manufacturing kind of line, or what is going to be the new product, or how can you improve things, right? And then the payment at the end, it is a bit tricky, because we talk about invisible payments, but how invisible do you make a payment? Yes, because at some point you have to have that extra consent of the shopper into, yes, I do want to make that payment, but rather than like, oh yeah, I like it, yeah, let me buy it. Does that actually mean that I want it? So that's kind of like where we at Worldpay don't like to talk about like invisible payments. We like to talk about like translucent payments. So there is some kind of friction at some point, because you just need that extra consent, or that extra authentication piece from your shopper to say, yeah, it's me, and I am consented, I really do want to buy this product now. So I think that's where the technology still needs to evolve a little bit, but definitely being more and more on growing, and we're seeing and we're hearing a lot of our retailers asking more about it.
Absolutely. We're having so many questions come in. There's one thing that asks just about, all the payment solutions that you were talking about and we've discussed throughout. Are they more for online purchases, or are they in-store retail payments, or do they have different payment options?
Yes, so I think the ones that we saw on the graphs were mainly for e-commerce, but on our report that everyone, of course, should download after, we look at both, right? The e-commerce and point of sale. So just to give you an overview, like we were talking before about in-store payments, payments in store are still very cash or card heavy, because there hasn't been like a lot of innovation lately. But now we were saying like all of the digital wallets, and even contactless, which is kind of like a step farther from a card as well. All of those payment methods are starting to move into the offline world, as the shopper is no longer saying, oh, I'm going to pay in this channel with this payment method, and in this other with this other one. They just have their preferred payment method, and that's how they want to pay. So we're going to see, and you can see now that in-store payment technology is replicating a lot of what is working online. So yeah, that would start growing and growing. And also, like, right now in store, there's a lot of new technology like scan and go. So very similar to the Amazon Go format. A lot of our retailers are now saying, hey, now there's some shopper that just don't want to interact at all. So can we get some kind of like mobile app where they can just scan their product and then pay on their mobile phone? Now, what is that, an in-store or an e-commerce payment, right? So all of the lines are getting very, very blurry. And they will more and more as the stores convert into a more digital and more mobile place, rather than how many of them are right now.
Absolutely. And we have time for just one more question. I've noticed in Q&A there have been some geography-specific questions like Africa and US. We separated the regions out. So next week we'll be discussing payment systems specifically in Asia Pacific. Mm-hmm. After that, we'll address the US. So hopefully we can answer some of your questions then. The last from here is someone said, do you see retailers using open banking payments in lieu of card services? What are
Yes.
your thoughts on that?
Yes, so I think we touched on it a little bit before. Open banking is a bank transfer, right? So we were talking about how how shoppers can also go into the bank to just make the payment. Now, as I was saying before, it was a bit tricky because each bank would have like a different way to integrate, and how do you cover 100% of the banks, and in Europe when you have so many local banks per country. But with the new regulation like PSD2, which is going to force banks to just use one standard API, 100% the technology will be there ready. Now, from a retailer perspective, it has a lot of advantages, as I said. So you have instant funds that you get, and then you also have no chargebacks, which is fantastic. I get the question is going to be more around the shopper adoption, and how is the shopper going to feel if they don't have that liability switch when there's like, oh, this was not my payment, and they're not getting the money back, or and the user experience is now being much nicer, because before you had to click, you have to click and you have to go to your bank mobile app, right? So you're redirecting again. So the first time that you do it, especially, but now the technology is getting so much better that once you've done it once, the second and the third time, you already have the streamlined solution. So you just need either your whatever biometric that you're using with your mobile bank app, and then just make the payment right there in like just one click. So it could be pretty smooth. So I definitely think that this is going to be probably the next one that we're going to start seeing growing, just the same way we were seeing the digital wallets in the last couple of years.
Maria, thank you so much for sharing all of your wisdom with us, and thank you to everybody who's tuned in. That's all the time that we have for today. But if you have any further questions that we weren't able to answer, or you have any feedback, please feel free to send it to Vogue Business or to Maria directly. And our emails are on the screen along with the link to download the report. Have a great rest of the day, everybody. Thank you so much, Maria.
Thank you so much, Katie. It was a pleasure.
All right, take care.